After just about 30 years, Doom has finally been voxelized. Yes, much like your favorite digging simulator, Doom's once 2D sprite graphics have been given a whole extra dimension in space thanks to modder Daniel Peterson, aka Chilo. In today's video, I will talk about why this is so interesting, how the mod was made, and of course, show you a number of comparisons along the way. So grab that chainsaw, rev it up, and let's get psyched about a voxel Doom. So why on earth would you want to play Doom with voxels? Because it's cool, enough said. But seriously, beyond just being neat in its own right, voxels are another way to remix Doom from the classic way of playing. Maybe you're like me and you've played Doom dozens of times, and this is an interesting way to enjoy it differently, with a 3D twist. But I think the real reason to use Doom with voxels is because of the modern way people play Doom, and that tends to be via source ports at higher resolutions and quite often with mouse look. Original Doom, like you're seeing here, running natively on DOS on period correct hardware, does not have the ability for you to look up or down. If you are shooting enemies that are elevated above you, for example, you may have a hard time seeing them, and the game will just choose to automatically aim vertically for you. This can be a bit frustrating for someone with modern sensibilities in first-person games, but it can also be frustrating just in general, as Doom's auto-aim is just an assumption about what you want to shoot. So modern source ports like GZ Doom have real 3D look like you can see here, thus you can look around levels in proper 3 dimensions. With this enabled as it is by default, you can shoot enemies at varying heights to your heart's content. Using 3D look, I think the environments look fine in modern source ports like GZ Doom. But enemies and items in the game will look a little bit off. They are indeed just 2D sprites that move to face the camera. This can look a bit awkward, I think, when combined with 3D look. Objects in the game are always just locked into your view, almost staring back at you, twisting with the camera. When this happens, I think the object in 3D space no longer really looks like an object, and instead just kind of looks like a paper cutout. Not all sprites in Doom, though, have it this bad. Enemies, for example, have a limited number of sprites making up rotational facings, so the sprite will change with the camera moving around them. This gives off a better illusion of it being an object in 3D space. Still, there will be harsh transitions when the sprite changes, and the sprite itself will lack any overlapping details. With Voxel Doom, the sprites are given the 3-dimensional treatment, and these issues go away. The pile of guts on the ground, for example, now, well, they don't just rotate to face the camera. It will be an object in its own right with depth and no breaking down of the illusion of that depth when the camera moves around it. This will apply to all camera-facing sprites from the original game. Even explosions and things like bullet puffs will now be done with 3D voxels. Health packs will no longer just rotate to face the camera, and instead will have tops and bottoms and sides and more that such a box would really have in 3D space. And yeah, as you can imagine, making this possible at all required a bit of creative thinking on the modder's behalf. Doom's original art never showed the sides, tops, and bottoms for many of its objects, so Daniel had to be creative. A good example can be found with the infamous explosive hazard barrels. In the original, they moved to face the camera, of course, always showing that one side. It kind of has the illusion of depth here because a real barrel is really similar from all sides. In the voxelized version of the barrel actually occupies 3D space, so it'll have variation depending upon how you're looking at it. And it has detail which will self-obscure, something which a 2D sprite cannot do. Also importantly, Daniel's added a bit of detail in there. You can definitely make out the animation of the bubbling caustic surface at the top of the barrel much more so with the voxel model. And that is the thing about Daniel's voxel models here. They add depth, but you also get a bit of extra personality, so to speak, from those added details on the sides of objects that you really never could have seen in the original 2-dimensional sprite. And I think even with added details on the far sides of objects, Daniel has managed to stay within the core Doom art style, never straying too far. So the objects really look like they belong in the pixelized world we're seeing. There's even a cool bit of added animation for pickups like armor pieces or health flasks or weapons, and they now rotate like an arena shooter of old. For the enemies though, things are a little different. If you recall, the original Doom has different sprites for the various facings an enemy may have. So you can rotate around them, and you can see that sprite changing with the perspective, every 45 degrees or so. Daniel here did something really cool. Here the profiles or backsides of the voxel models have a direct inspiration and lineage from those various sprite facings. So when you're at those key angles, the voxel model will look identical to the old sprite work. But when rotating around an object, you no longer get those harsh transitions from the sprites making up the facings transitioning. It's almost like you're getting your cake and eating it here too with this voxel mod. Obviously here the enemies will look a tad different at angles that are not divisible by 45, but that's kind of the point of voxels in the first place. All in all, looking over the variety of enemy types and world objects, I would say Daniel has done a bang up amazing job here translating once 2D things into 3D things, and it still looks like Doom. So how was it done? Well, first there's the technical aspect, and to understand that, I asked Nash Muhandes, who helped Daniel get his cool voxel models rendering in GZ Doom in the first place. And as I mentioned, Voxel Doom requires a source port, and that one is the stalwart GZ Doom. GZ Doom apparently uses a voxel loader, which is borrowed from Build Engine and licensed directly from Ken Silverman himself. So the voxels in GZ Doom are going to look a lot like those you may have seen in Build Engine games such as Blood, aka they're going to look pretty great. From here on, the voxels are rendered in one of two ways depending upon your rendering path. With the hardware renderer that uses GPU and something like OpenGL, the voxel geometry is converted into a mesh made of triangles that is rasterized on the GPU and drawn natively as 3D geometry with very basic hidden surface removal. Basically, the models will look like voxels when using the hardware mode, but you can kind of think of them as weirdly dense triangle models. As a result, they probably are not too optimized in the end, considering their origin point as voxel models, but that's not such a big deal here, considering we're just rendering Doom. The second method of rendering is when you choose the software path, which will use your CPU and will construct the voxel models in real time, just like GZ Doom would construct sprites using the software renderer. This is span-based rendering, as it is called. Here, each tiny little voxel unit will be rendered as if it were a billboard sprite. So if you look in that software mode, you can almost see like the voxels are sprites that are rotating to face the camera. In the end, this means the game can look different based upon your rendering mode. In my opinion, if you want the game to look chunkiest and most like the original Doom, use the software mode. But if you want the game to run as fast as possible at high resolutions with optional MSAA and have no distortion with mouse look, well, you should definitely choose a hardware rendering path. Asking Daniel about the art creation process revealed that it's been iterative over time, but generally the most modern workflow is that there's a base skeleton of a model made, like a wireframe armature you might see in a sculpturing studio, and then he kind of fills out the muscles and flesh of it, so to speak, by eyeing up the various poses of the original sprites. He cleans it up at the end and paints it to be colored in the same way the original sprite was. As you're seeing on screen here with Doom 2's arch file, this is an incredibly hardcore way of going about it, but I think it pays off in the end given what we're seeing on screen. And with that being said, you're probably wondering how to play this. First of all, you got to download the mod and GZ Doom, and you put the mods.zip folder into GZ Doom folder alongside the doom.wad from a legal version of Doom or Ultimate Doom. Yes, so far the mod only works with the original Doom, not Doom 2. And to get voxel models in game, all you have to do is drag and drop the zip file onto the GZ Doom exe. If you want this to be an automated process though, you can edit the game's config file after it boots one time. Here you will add in these lines here at this moment in the config file to tell it to load the voxel mod zip automatically by putting in the exact file path of that zip folder. As to how you should run the game, I've been showing it off in 4K with tons of MSAA. But honestly, you really don't need to do that if you like your Doom chunky like I do. I also played the game in native 4x3, 320x200 scaling like the original Doom, as GZ Doom allows, even with MSAA. And I think that looks really cool. You can even try and make custom 16:9 versions of that with slightly different aspect ratios. And if you are playing Voxel Doom in this chunky mode, I honestly think the voxel models look better than at a super crisp 4K or other resolutions, as they have this illusion of being the sprites, but just better. The lack of fidelity makes them seem more compelling, in my opinion. As you can imagine, this is Doom, so really any GPU or CPU should run this mod well, but I would say watch out for the MSA-A option in GZ Doom if you're using the hardware rendering mode. It'll make the game look smoother, but when jacked all the way up, as you're seeing here, it can even cause frame rate issues on monster GPUs. So be reasonable. And that is really all I have to say about Voxel Doom, a simple mod to install that has incredible results when you see it in game. It may seem simple from the outside, but I found it obvious when talking to Daniel and Nash that the creation process and hooking it into GZ Doom was not necessarily simple. So I'm really grateful for their hard work and artistic attention to the detail. And hopefully you are too, and I definitely recommend trying this out if you can, and supporting the creators on Patreon and Twitter and elsewhere. But that is enough from me for now. If you did like this video, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're already a subscriber, hit that little bell in the corner to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to help us out, support DF on Patreon to get years of our content in high quality for download. Other than that, write a comment below, follow on Twitter, and as always, this is Alex bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.